"Mama, Mama, Mama!" The three little voices seemed to chime, excitedly from outside. "Mama, come see what Grandpa brought us!" I wiped the dripping dishwater off my hands and went to the door. Grandpa had indeed arrived, and with a horse trailer, and was leading a small pony down the ramp. Moving closer, I saw it was a small Shetland pony that really looked more like a moth-eaten buffalo than a horse. And above the gleeful cries of the children, he explained the pony had foundered and was going to be destroyed. And he thought if we kept his feet trimmed, he would make a nice pony for the children. I wouldn't have to worry about them getting hurt, he assured me, because with his feet he really couldn't move that fast. For some reason, he was immediately christened Mr. Q. Mr. Q was a perfect gentleman for the first 24 hours, a time frame that coincided with the departure of Grandpa and his horse trailer. Then he decided it was time to assert himself. First of all, he did not like children, and certainly could not and would not abide their crawling around on him. Second, being staked in the yard was undignified and a downright bore. The pasture was much more to his liking. Quite frankly, after the first few times he bared his teeth at the children, I had to agree with him. The pasture was the best place. He quickly learned that the children's father did not condone his tacky behavior, nor would he put up with it. So when worse came to worse, he could conjure up behavior that nearly created a faint halo above the pointed little ears. Unfortunately, my husband was not home that much, so Mr. Q and I had agreed to disagree. I had always heard you had to let horses know who is boss. However he wanted it was fine with me. One would have thought that having the whole pasture to himself, undisturbed by children, green grass to eat, a pond full of water, would have made any horse happy. Wrong. One morning, after the two older children and my husband went off to school, the telephone rang. "Mrs. Venable, this is your neighbor just over the hill. Thought you'd like to know that your kid's little pony is loose. Ran past my place just a few minutes ago." I called my husband, and he hurried home to rescue Mr. Q. As he pulled into the driveway, there stood Mr. Q waiting for him. That halo again. This seemed to set a pattern for days to come. It seemed that nearly daily, my phone rang with tales of the loose pony. Sometimes he would wait until we were away from the house and double back, waiting for us with a nonchalant look. Other times he made it far more challenging for Brad and I. I was continually amazed at his ingenuity. The final breakout occurred one nippy spring morning. I was alerted to the annex of Mr. Q and was told he was heading down the road toward the highway, about 3 miles west. Brad and I jumped into the car and drove out to the road, where several neighbors were gathered, trying to head off Mr. Q. The cold air had made him feel friskier than ever, and I recalled Grandpa's famous last words about Mr. Q not being able to move very fast. As we all finally stopped running, out of breath, finally one of the men suggested that if we had a rope, we might be able to rope him. I remembered my husband's lariat and hurried back to the house to get it. On the way back, the more I looked at that loop, the more convinced I was, obviously a madness created by exhaustion and running, capable of roping that blessed pony, which I did. I just walked up to that group of guys, and while Mr. Q poised himself for takeoff, I swung that loop and it sailed over his neck, slick as a whistle. It seemed an eternity before anyone said a word, sort of like the scene was frozen in time. But fortunately, one of the men recovered quickly enough to help me hold the rope, because once Mr. Q got over the shock, he was going to move it out. I was lucky, not strong. I enjoyed a sort of Calamity Jane reputation for quite a while. The sight of me sort of admitted, "Oh wow, you should have seen her." My husband had a hard time believing that story. Me, I just shrugged my shoulders, and in the spirit of the true West, a gal's gotta do what a gal's gotta do. The rope episode seemed to cool Mr. Q's heels for a while, plus the fact that his hooves were really in bad shape, so he really didn't cause too much trouble, and did stay in the pasture. With school out, the children and their fathers spent quite a bit of time grooming Mr. Q. I was sure our excellent care had made a new horse out of him. He certainly looked like a new horse. It was the 4th of July weekend, and friends and relatives came, so the men went down to the pasture to get Mr. Q for the kids to ride. A short time later, Kathy came running in the house. "Mama, something is wrong with Mr. Q." I ran outside, and here came the men, literally carrying that horse, not knowing what else to do. I ran inside and got an old blanket and spread it out in the grass near the back door for him. My husband explained as we examined his bloody foot that Mr. Q had apparently gotten hung up in the barbed wire several days ago and had almost sawed off his foot trying to get loose. and when they took his foot down, he passed out. No telling how long he had been caught in the fence. One look at the wounded animal, and the nurse came out in me. I insisted a vet be called and went about making Mr. Q as comfortable as possible. I figured what was good for people would surely work for horses too. I'm sure the vet thought I was a real loon. When he arrived, I had Mr. Q covered. Well, he was trembling and had an ice pack on his head. The vet said the infection was pretty bad and he was terribly dehydrated and really doubted the pony would make it. I insisted we try, so the vet gave him a shot and left medicine for a few days. He said I would have to figure out how to get liquids down him. Mr. Q was fed water with a syringe and table food by hand at least hourly for what seemed forever. We dressed and bandaged his leg twice a day. Very soon he did show improvement, and a special friendship soon developed between Mr. Q and myself. When he was strong enough, he would follow me around like a puppy, very much the grateful gentleman, even nuzzling me with his nose to be petted. Of course, a leopard can't really change his spots, nor could Mr. Q resist terrorizing the children every time they tried to go outside. As he got better, we put him back into the pasture. Well, a day in the pasture, he succeeded in breaking open the leg wound, so I brought him back into the yard. Some farmhouses have dogs for watchdogs. Venables had a pony. At the sound of a car, Mr. Q would come tearing around the house, whinnying, come to a screeching halt at the gate, teeth bared. At least I never lost track of the kids, since they could not come and go at will. Mr. Q's very favorite game became tear clothes off the clothesline. At first, when I was hanging up clothes, he would stand there pulling out the wet clothes and running with them. A swat on the nose seemed to cure that. He got sneakier and more cagey. He would wait until I had finished and went into the house, and then he would go up and down the line until he found my husband's clothes, pull them off the line, and stomp them. Talk about revenge. The clothesline bit became a real bore, and I tried banishing him in the pasture again, but relented when his wound bled. I truly wondered if this was to be forever. My parents came to stay with Kathy and Michael. Following an accident with Brad, Mr. Q must have thought it was a field day with both my husband and I gone. So he really took advantage of it. The new favorite game was when Grandma and the kids went to the wash house. A few feet from the back door, he wouldn't let them out. Being the bully that he was, he really wouldn't challenge a man, so when Dad would hear the commotion and come to the door to see what was going on, Mr. Q would be casually sauntering around the corner, glancing up as if to say, "What's up, man, Mr. Innocent?" Once in a while, the gate would be left open. Then he could play Wild Mustang. The game quickly got old with Dad, and with well-heeled leg, Mr. Q was turned out to the pasture. We moved into town shortly after that, and a neighbor lady asked me if I would consider letting her keep Mr. Q for us. He was such a darling little horse, and maybe I wouldn't mind if her grandchildren rode him once in a while. Mr. Q and I both horse-laughed. What a surprise she was in for. We parted company. He to new terrorist activities, and me to all well-earned peace and a nice quiet yard with a cat.